90.7 KPFK, Los Angeles.
The following radio program has been approved for broadcast by the Federal Communications Commission and is in compliance with all community standards.
From Los Angeles,
Cary Harrison.
Russia, if you're listening.
Talk show, random, political, outrageous, philosophical, analytical, passionate, sunsets, roadkill cooking tips, open-minded, swordsman, bent, resolute, chocolate, bushwhacker, belt buckles, investigative, companion, fearless, calling, piercing the cloud of mainstream entertainment. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
It is the Cary Harrison Files coming to you live from Switzerland today, neutral Switzerland, where I was lucky enough, honored really enough for they're doing a documentary on private schools and education and those of us who've hopefully made some kind of positive impact in the world. And so, hey, it was my turn. And all of that is because of you. You who are watching right now on YouTube or Substack, simply by going to @Cary Harrison. You can just Google that for YouTube or Substack, and then make sure you sign up for our newsletter where we can deliver things we no longer can do on the radio, public radio specifically. So all that to say, it doesn't matter where you're located on Earth. It's all happening the same way. There's probably not a live human anywhere that doesn't know what's happening back at home and talking about the same things that you and I are endlessly talking about. The Supreme Court just slammed the door, and things have changed a lot. Do you ever notice how corruption never really dies? It just molts. It gets a fresh exoskeleton. It crawls back under a different name. Civilization, that well-pressed suit of human decency, has always been tailored by the same greasy hands that stitch virtue out of vice and sell it as moral fiber. Every generation thinks that it's discovered depravity for the very first time, when in truth, it's just inherited a family recipe. And now comes The Spider, a book about a creature so patient, so meticulous, it could teach Machiavelli how to crochet. Not the garden variety spider that catches flies. This one preferred his prey well-educated, socially ambitious, and conveniently dazzled by proximity to power. The kind of spider who built his web not in the forest, but in penthouses, in private jets, on the trembling strings of political connection. This spider didn't spin silk, he spun favors. The web wasn't adhesive, it was seductive. And if you stumbled into it, odds are you smiled for the camera first. Everyone in that world knew about the web. They just called it networking. When the lights went out, networking turned into something closer to necromancy. Now, Barry Levine, veteran of America's long voyeuristic courtship with its own scandals, has crawled into the ruins of that web with a flashlight and a notepad. He's seen the molted skin, the ghost of privilege, and the trembling hands that swear they never knew. His book, his new book, doesn't just describe the web, it dares you to admit you helped weave it just by watching. Because the spider, you see, isn't one man. He's the mirror held up to a society that mistakes access for worth. It mistakes access for charm and goodness and silence, mistakes silence for sophistication. So tonight, we're not just talking about the monster in the silk, or this morning, depending where you're located on the planet. We're talking about the hands that built the room around him. Barry Levine, I want to welcome you to the Cary Harrison Files.
Thank you, Cary, for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
And we're honored to have you on public radio as long as we exist. And we'll probably get to that a little later. Barry Levine, the Supreme Court has finally told, and I'm going to call her Ghislaine Maxwell because I understand her sister pronounces that, but let's clear that up right now. Yeah. Am I pronouncing Ghislaine correctly?
Well, that's how the family pronounces her name. The media, for the most part, calls her Ghislaine, but we can call her Miss Maxwell, although she doesn't deserve a miss because she is a absolute predator and a sexual trafficker of children. So I'm just going to call her Maxwell in this interview.
Okay. I like Maxwell. So The Supreme Court has finally told Maxwell to pack it up and stop appealing to their better angels, that the Supreme Court is fresh out. And she claimed that her conviction was a carnival of errors, that her jury was tainted, speaking of taints, her trial was unfair, and that somehow the deck had been stacked against a woman whose social calendar once doubled as an address book for the powerful. If the court had any sympathy, they must have lost it somewhere between the evidence locker and the moral swamp that her defense kept wading through. Can you bring us up to speed on this?
Yes, Cary. For those unfamiliar, Maxwell, Ghislaine, or we'll just call her Maxwell, had been the former girlfriend and co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein. And I featured them in an investigative book called The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And this book took numerous years of research, and it really was a horrific story about how this coupling came together. She needed him, and he needed her. And for those who don't know her story, she grew up in wealth in England. Her father was Robert Maxwell, famous Fleet Street newspaper publisher. He came to America in the late 1980s and bought the New York Daily News and wanted to start an empire in the U.S. And he brought Ghislaine, his only daughter, with him. His youngest child with him, who was his favorite. In fact, he had a yacht named the Lady Ghislaine. And through her father, she was introduced to the celebrities of New York, including one Donald J. Trump, who interestingly wanted to have his own magazine and appealed to Mr. Maxwell to publish a magazine about his own growing real estate empire. And Ghislaine collected a lot of celebrities and friends, including, of course, Prince Andrew of the royal family. And she knew many movers and shakers on both sides of the pond. And when her father mysteriously died in the early night, off a yacht in the Caribbean, she interestingly came back to America and found herself in the arms of one Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the public and researchers like myself have questioned, how did they come together? Well, her father, as we know, had been involved in espionage. Her father was connected to the Israeli Mossad, and he had connections to British intelligence. And of course, there's been rumors that Jeffrey Epstein has been an asset of intelligence. And it's interesting that this pairing came together. She needed money, and Jeffrey Epstein needed an entree into that world of the rich and famous. And so they basically hooked up together, and they provided that for one another. Now, what Maxwell didn't know at the time was that Jeffrey Epstein had a secret life. He was interested in underage women, children, and he took her to the Midwest to a music school in which he had gone to as a young boy in Michigan, and had given money over the years. And in fact, they opened a cabin in his name, a lodge called the Epstein Lodge. It was on this particular trip, only a year or two into their relationship, when Jeffrey Epstein targeted a 14-year-old girl and had convinced her to come to Florida with them, in which he promised this young girl that he would provide her with private music lessons and so forth. His actual motive, of course, was abuse of this young girl. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, why didn't Ghislaine Maxwell just run away at that point and drop this crazy guy? But instead, she stayed with him and became his partner. And as I called them in my book, they were the predatory Bonnie and Clyde. She would find these girls and groomed them for Jeffrey Epstein, and then basically delivered them to the wolf. And along the way, they made connections with many rich and powerful former presidents, politicians, members of the royal family, international bankers, and so forth. And they kept this scam going for a number of years. And it's just a horrible, horrible story. Now she was convicted, sent to jail for 20 years after Jeffrey Epstein's death of sex trafficking. And she has appealed that. She appealed it right up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, in fact, yesterday rejected her request. So right now, she is going to have to serve out the remainder of her 20-year term unless she receives a presidential pardon. And right now, that's what she's putting her chips on.
And of course, it makes sense that this is the same Supreme Court that has given the sitting president, or any president of the United States at this point, we see complete immunity, just like a king, sovereign immunity as a king would have from doing anything at all, as long as it's an official act. And this is a problem, seeing as the entire MAGA base was built on QAnon, on all of this stuff, and now it's sort of come back to roost, and it's become a real irritant. I'm just going to reintroduce you here. For those of you listening, which you all are, those of you watching a stream, you already know, but for those using just your ears, we are talking right now to Barry Levine. And you are listening to the Cary Harrison Files, where we pull the velvet off the velvet ropes, take a long look at what's squirming underneath. We're talking about the spider inside the web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And it's been written. It's a brand new book. It is going to be available to you. And it blows the lid off of what you're hearing about and explains the why, not the what, but the why, so that you can navigate this future. It's a book about the dark art of power, privilege, and those who mistake immunity for innocence. And our guest, Barry Levine, has been digging through the cobwebbed corners of that world. He's been tracing how a certain financier's charm turned into a global infection of complicity. And he just pointed out that the Supreme Court has slammed the door on Ghislaine Maxwell's appeal, yet her story refuses to die, like a perfume you can't quite wash off. So if you're just joining us, you've walked into a conversation about money, access, and the moral vertigo that comes when the powerful start to eat their young. Let's jump into the next point here, Barry Levine. We're talking right now about this interesting and complex, really political organism. And the reason that it's interesting to a lot of people is because it points back to the head of the snake. It's not a sex conversation. It's not a mere scandal. It's sort of the centerpiece of the war on society turned back on the warrior himself. There's her latest act, Ghislaine Maxwell's, the bizarre interview with the former Trump Lieutenant Todd Blanche. It was a chat that was so soft it could have been recorded on a pillow. But days later, she miraculously reassigned to a cushier minimum security resort in Texas. Is that a coincidence? Sure. And we've got beachfront property on Mars, if you happen to be buying. What do we make of that? What does it smell like? Does it smell like justice or more like choreography?
Well, Cary, this was, as I've called it, an infomercial for Donald Trump in terms of that interview that he dispatched Todd Blanche, one of his former attorneys, down to a courthouse in Florida to interview Ghislaine Maxwell. The purpose of that interview, it was set up for the public that Todd Blanche would probe her on what she knew about third parties, other men who might have been involved with Jeffrey Epstein, who took part in the sex trafficking. But instead, the conversation pretty much was steered towards clearing Donald Trump of any wrongdoing. She repeatedly praised President Trump in this, I don't even call it an interview because there were never any real follow-up questions. There was many times when he could have jumped in with real questions, but he allowed her to speak. The purpose of the interview was to get on the record Miss Maxwell saying that she witnessed no wrongdoing involving Donald Trump in terms of his past 15-year friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. And they wanted to get that on the record in black and white and make that very clear to the public that here was the actual co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein, pretty much saying that Donald Trump never saw anything, never did anything, never took part in any wrongdoing. And for that, she was rewarded with a trip to a minimum security facility in Texas, where they have Pilates classes and flower arrangement making and so forth. This is a woman who was an absolute predator. In fact, as I wrote in my book, I view her even worse to some degree than Jeffrey Epstein, because as a woman, she cheated these girls into thinking that she was going to be their big sister, that she was going to be their mother, that she would be watching out for them in terms of all the promises that they made to these children, how they would help them with private lessons at a music school or at a law school or things like that, and that she would be watching out for their welfare. But instead, that was just a ruse. The ruse was to groom these girls. She would take these girls shopping. She would buy them underwear and lingerie, and she would instruct them how to perform sexual acts for Jeffrey Epstein and his male buddies. And so I view her even worse to some degree than Jeffrey Epstein, because as a woman, she should have been watching out for these girls, but her only purpose was to feed these children to Jeffrey Epstein. And what we know about her is very complicated. At one point, she believed that she loved him. She wanted to have a child with Jeffrey Epstein, but he was not a normal individual. He couldn't have a normal relationship. He existed by having at least 3 sexualized massages a day. Every single day, women were brought into his homes in Florida, New York, New Mexico, his island in the Virgin Islands, and his apartment in Paris. And these girls, a constant stream of girls, would be fed to him. And Maxwell took part in some of the sexual abuse of these girls, but primarily in the recruitment of these girls. So I completely have, she has no moral compass whatsoever. So whatever she says out of her mouth is an absolute lie. And I do believe that she lied repeatedly in the interview with Todd Blanche. And the government, in fact, had accused her of perjury at the time of her trial.
Barry Levine, you've written this really tell-all book, and this is one of the first leaps off the high dive to really put this out, and you're putting it out in the media capital of Earth, Los Angeles, right now. A lot of people are fascinated by it. I'm looking at tweets and emails already coming in. Here's a question from a listener. This summer, you wrote that sharp piece for New York, laying out 9 things the Epstein files may still be hiding. Obviously, the invisible hands behind the silk curtains. If those files ever crawl into daylight, what might we actually learn?
Well, that was an opinion piece that I wrote for the New York Times, trying to crystallize the more than 100,000 pages of documents that the government currently has. And I do believe that those 100,000 pages of documents do hold the secrets of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in terms of the other men that we are aware of who took part in the sex trafficking, who should be brought to justice. And not only them, but the enablers, the men, the model recruiters and so forth, who would put young girls on planes to Jeffrey Epstein's island in the Virgin Islands and promised them that they would be receiving a shot in a modeling career, when in fact they were then ferried to his island for sexual abuse. There are records, there are flight logs, there are financial disclosure logs of individuals, and we need to get our hands on these papers to see what's going on. As I wrote, one of the things we're looking for, and Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon has jumped on this, and that's the going down the financial road. Follow the money. Let's see where the money leads us. He, in fact, learned that there were 5,000 wire transfers totaling $1 billion of money ferried through U.S. and Russian banks to pay individuals. We need to zero in and get a hold of those papers so we could see exactly who Jeffrey Epstein was paying, how much they were being paid, and what the purposes of those payments were. We know that, for instance, Chase, which was his main bank in America, red flagged these suspicious payments. And in fact, at the end of the day, after Jeffrey Epstein's death, they had to pay nearly $200 million to Jeffrey Epstein's victims because they didn't properly follow the money. They didn't properly sort out the situation that money was being moved for a criminal enterprise. Okay, so one thing in the files is the financial documents. And then, for instance, there are 50 computers and hundreds of disks that contain information and photos. What is on those computers? Are there lists of other men? Is there blackmail information? The government has said there's no blackmail information and there's no third parties, but I don't believe that. And in fact, Congressman Thomas Massey has said that he is aware that in those files are the names of at least 20 men, very famous, wealthy individuals who took part in the sex trafficking. Why is the government holding back these files? And let's also look at, we know that Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, his attorney general, acknowledged that Donald Trump is named numerous times in the files. I'm not accusing him of any wrongdoing, but I think as the sitting president, we should see each and every reference to Donald Trump in the Jeffrey Epstein files. What were the circumstances of him being named in these files numerous occasions? And that goes as well for Jeffrey Epstein's former friend, former President Clinton, who traveled on his plane numerous times. Let's look at all the references to former President Clinton in the files, along with all of the other individuals. There's information also about Jeffrey Epstein's death behind bars, the mysterious death that took place here in New York. So far, the actual autopsy report has never been released, but that's in the Epstein files. We need to see that autopsy report, and we need to find out. One of the questions I have is, was DNA testing done on the noose and the garrote in which the government claimed that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide by in his jail cell? Was there DNA testing? We don't know that because we have not seen the actual autopsy report or the actual official paperwork that was done after his death in terms of what circumstances took place in that cell. Were there inmates who were interviewed? I was told when I was writing my book that a prisoner in a cell nearby heard Jeffrey Epstein ripping up bed sheets, and of course he used bed sheets to hang himself. Was that man interviewed? What about the other inmates who I interviewed for my book, who said that Jeffrey Epstein had also made statements about Donald Trump behind bars? In addition to that, he talked about these girls, about suicide. Were these individuals interviewed? We don't know that because all of this stuff is in the government files that the government thus far is refusing to release.
Barry Levine, I'm just going to jump in for a second because we're going to pause and give a little love to KPFK. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, did you write this at your peril? Are you worried about blowback? And I'm going to quickly answer your question about what happened to Jeffrey Epstein, the same thing that happened to Saddam Hussein. Here was a guy that was hunted for a decade, finally found in the most surveilled prison cell that has ever existed, surrounded by Navy SEALs and Marines, cameras, and somehow commits suicide. Just like who? Like, it's impossible. So these are the questions that you're asking, and these are the questions that need to be answered. Coming up, well, here we are. The Supreme Court's washed its hands. Ghislaine Maxwell's praising her old friends in high places. Barry Levine's pulling the last strands of the web out into daylight. After this break, we're going to ask, how deep did the silk run? Who's still hiding behind it? And if the Epstein files ever do surface, are we finally going to learn the truth or just get around to names that mysteriously vanish? Don't go anywhere. When we return, Barry Levine is going to help us follow the money and maybe, just maybe, the monster.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files. We're going to take a moment to pause and raise a little money for KPFK. Now, public radio, as you know, has been defunded. PBS has been defunded. What does that mean to you? Well, we've been talking for years and years about here's what could happen. It actually happened. So when we talk about the stress, and we are, by the way, the only talk radio station, we also play music, as you know, that exists now west of the Mississippi with a signal strength that we have of 212,000 watts. We're a legacy radio station going back to the 1950s. That was an FM that had to be so strong in case there was a nuclear war that everybody could hear it. We go almost up to San Francisco, almost out to Las Vegas, and down to Mexico. With the defunding, we are literally on that dental floss of survivability at this point. If we go away, you will get no more information. You will never hear what you're hearing today from our guest right now, Barry Levine. And Barry has written a book that is so important. It is so groundbreaking, so mind-blowing. It's called The Spider Inside the Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We're giving it to you as a thank you gift right now for a pledge of $120. $120 goes a long way at KPFK. With that, you get the book as a thank you. You get to read it. You get to hold it in your hands before it's banned. Just like this show has been banned in 5 different states. Except, of course, as an audiobook where they haven't figured out how to do that yet. We are in a perilous place where it's very, very difficult to navigate a foreseeable future that feels very jolly to most people. What you're seeing happening on a daily basis means this signal goes away. The FCC has already declared it. Project 2025 has listed us by the name of this network and the call letters of this station. The crosshairs are on, and it's going to go away unless we find a way to fund it. We have been defunded officially. As you know, I am, ready for this, volunteering in my own career as if I were 23 years old again. First day on the radio. It's free. Someday, here. Talk about it coming around. Here it is. That someday. I am now volunteering in my own career. Why? Because we have a duty. We are like cockeyed Paul Revere's riding the last horse. And we can keep that stable full of horses, but it does take a little bit of heavy lifting from each of us. So for a $120 donation right now to KPFK to keep us on the air, we're going to be able to give you a copy of The Spider Inside the Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It's an incredible book. It is a tell-all read, and you're going to want to have that one copy before these things get taken away. And I don't mean to say that in a way that negatively disrupts the publishing prowess of our wonderful guest, Barry Levine. But let's face it, it's not going to go over well for so long, just like this station after years of the hard work we've been doing. Think of how $1 actually works here. And this is my opinion. $1 will turn a bunch of shows into podcasts. Those podcasts then are heard on Spotify, on Apple, on everything with a chip and a signal, and they replicate. And every day, even months from now, a brand new person hears it for the very first time. And then they share it, and they like it, and they share it. This information is different from the old days when it was on the radio. If you didn't hear it, you missed it. It never happened. What happens here happens in perpetuity. This is school. This is university level school that happens in in spades. It just keeps doubling and tripling, but we have to be able to pay for that. We have to pay for the bandwidth. We have to pay for the light bulbs. And we're required, by the way, to have studios and microphones. Even with COVID, we couldn't go in for a year. 2 years in some cases. We still had to maintain studios, microphones, and engineers because that's what the FCC says. When it was built in the 1930s, basically, there was no concept of internet and technology and home studios and remote anything, Zoom, whatever you want, could not exist. So it's baked in, built in. We have these bills to pay one way or the other, and it keeps us on the air. So I'm asking you to pick up the phone right now and call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, and make that $120 pledge. Do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because this is not the typical year of years past where we're asking for support because we needed it. Well, we did need it, but we also got a little love from Ford Foundation. We got a little, not motor company directly. We got a little love from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We got it from you, the listener. We are, by the way, the original version of listener-supported radio. Pacifica. NPR came around in the 1970s. 20 years after we already existed. And they immediately started taking oil money and all the rest. That is not to say, not to disparage even 1% the quality of their content. It's awesome. But we have remained pure since 1950, I think 9. That's when KPFK was born. 1959. That makes it 66 years old. And we're still pure because of you. It is peer to peer. You listen, I talk, I listen when you talk. It is an unbelievable relationship, and it is still pure here, but we have to find new and creative ways to pay for it. So I want you to pick up the phone. Grab it right now. I'm looking at the lines lit up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've only got 5 lines. They roll over. So I have no idea how many more are after that. People are calling 818-985-KPFK, exactly as I'm asking you to do. Pick up that phone, call 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, $120 pledge. Goes so far nowadays with technology, it's as if you're putting in $1,000 or $10,000. Imagine what it would have cost before to have satellite trucks and to make dubbed copies and then farm them out or bicycle them, as we used to say, to all the different affiliates and hubs individually as tapes that they would play, big reel-to-reel tapes. The cost gone. This is a way to duplicate your message for next to nothing. So $120 pledge supports KPFK, keeps us on the air, and as a thank you gift, you get way more than you're going to hear in this interview. You're going to get all the amazing details written in the spider inside the web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. We're talking right now, of course, to its great author, Barry Levine. We're going to get back to that in just a second as we look at his book about the dark art of power, the dark art of privilege, the dark art about those who mistake immunity for innocence. And our guest, Barry Levine, has been digging through those cobwebbed corners of that world, tracing how a certain financier's charm turned into a global confection of complicity. Did I say confection? Yeah, that's what I meant. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Pick up the phone now. Call, make a pledge of $120, 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And you're going to get this beautiful thank you gift of the spider inside the web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And now, back to the show.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And it is the Cary Harrison File. Don't forget, we are live streaming on YouTube right now. Simply Google YouTube, or sorry, don't Google you can Google. YouTube is owned by Google. Google Cary Harrison on YouTube. Google Cary Harrison, C-A-R-Y, the Cary Grant spelling, on Substack. And you're going to get our newsletter. If you go to CaryHarrison.com, CaryHarrison.com, you're going to get our newsletter where we will include stuff that simply cannot be done, as you now know, on radio, defunded public radio. So check that out. Well, there is an old saying, if you want to know who runs the world, find out who isn't in prison. Right now, we're peeling back the drapes on one of civilization's most refined hypocrisies, the kind where money launders morality and everyone in the room pretends that they don't smell the bleach. We're talking about The Spider. This is a book, the one I've been talking about, and not the one in the corner of your ceiling, but the one who spun an entire social web out of charm, fear, and the kind of private lists that make senators go pale. And in the middle of that web, his most loyal lieutenant, the elegant, the tragic, the perennially innocent in her own eyes, that's Ghislaine Maxwell. And the Supreme Court just brushed off her final appeal, by the way, declaring that her conviction actually stands. And she swore her trial was unfair, that jurors were compromised, that the press poisoned the air. The press, whatever's left of it, doing a little bit of their job, thank God anymore, that somehow the press made her the true victim of her own social ecosystem. The court, in its infinite mercy, apparently disagreed. The court actually acting like a court for a moment. Yet, barely a blink later, here we are. She resurfaces in a cozy interview with one of Washington's former loyalists, Todd Blanche. A conversation so gentle, it should have been conducted in a lavender bath. Not long after, she's moved to a minimum security camp in Texas. And we're all sure the timing was purely coincidental. Purely. She even went out of her way to praise the former president like a debutante, well, current president too, like a debutante trying to remind the king that she once danced at his court. How far back do you think that courtship goes? Barry Levine is going to tell us. And is it really a coincidence that she's suddenly trading concrete for comfort? Barry.
Listen, Cary, the thing about Donald Trump is oftentimes decisions that he makes come from him being very personal. And again, he had a relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. They were friends back in the late 80s, early 90s. In fact, when he first began dating Melania, Melania, Jeffrey Epstein, and Ghislaine Maxwell would socialize together. They would go to parties at Mar-a-Lago. They would go to other social functions. So she wasn't a business associate. She was a personal friend of Donald Trump's. And when she was finally arrested after Jeffrey Epstein's death a year later and charged with sex trafficking as his co-conspirator, Donald Trump, in his first term as president, was asked what he thought of the arrest. And he couldn't think of one negative thing to say about her. He only would praise her. And you have to wonder to this day, what is she hiding? Does she have secrets about Donald Trump back from those old days? We don't know. And you have to wonder, is Donald Trump acting this way? Even saying yesterday to the media in Washington that he would consider a pardon. Now, he said he would speak to his Department of Justice about it. But the fact that we have a president of the United States who can't categorically say that he would not pardon a sex trafficker of children, to me, this is mind-boggling. Okay.
So,
and
Barry, let me.
Yeah.
I want to jump in because don't you love that when people go? I just want to ask you this question. I just want to say, well, I do. I just want to ask you this question. Does the American public get what this is, or do they think this is a sex scandal, like a senator who really loves his wife? He really does. He just has a boyfriend in the restroom somewhere. Do they see this as a sex scandal, or do they see this for what you're describing?
Listen, Cary, what's most interesting about the emergence of this scandal involving the Epstein files that erupted in early July when Pam Bondi said they would not release the files to the public, as the administration had promised complete transparency and being the most transparent administration in history. And then they said, sorry, we're not going to release any files. For the first time, you had his loyalists in MAGA, the MAGA base, who are saying, why aren't we getting these files? Again, members of the MAGA base, go back to Kash Patel before he became the director of the FBI, go back to Dan Bongino, his deputy, even Vice President Vance, before becoming VP, he questioned what was in the Epstein files and the fact that there had to be secrets about Jeffrey Epstein's death and possible third parties involving other men. So you had members of the MAGA base who have fueled these conspiracy theories among the base for years and years and years. And then, of course, his administration put their hands up and said, we're not going to release these files. So you have a split in this party. You've never had a split like this in terms of members of his own party who have questioned why the government is still holding on to these files. These files must be made transparent, not just for the public, not just for the media or book authors like myself, but for the survivors, for the victims of this tragedy. There's more than 1,000 women who have been identified of having been abused by Jeffrey Epstein, and some of them also by Ghislaine Maxwell, and some of them by other men who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked them to. For whatever favors, whether it was blackmail or for whatever favors, we still don't know. But there are 1,000 women out there, not only in America, but across the world. Some of these women, as I said earlier, were flown to his island under the promise that they would be having a modeling career, and in fact, they were only brought there for sex trafficking. Since the time of Ghislaine Maxwell's trial in 2021, one of the 4 courageous women who went on the witness stand and testified against her, she has since, her life has ended from a accidental drug overdose. A mother of 5 children who courageously stood up in court and pointed to Ghislaine Maxwell and said she had abused her since she was 14 years old. That woman is dead, sadly, from the trauma that these women go through every single day. Every single day they wake up and they still can't get out of their heads what happened to them years ago at the hands of these 2 monsters. And Carolyn Andriano, the courageous victim who testified against Ghislaine Maxwell, who passed on, she is not the only one. There's at least a half dozen women that I know about who have lost their lives through either suicide or drugs because of the victimization and the trauma. In fact, the main Jeffrey Epstein accuser, Virginia Roberts Giuffre in Australia, sadly took her own life earlier this year. She was the one who named Prince Andrew and a half dozen other men that she had been trafficked to when Ghislaine Maxwell recruited her at Donald Trump's estate, Mar-a-Lago, and brought her to Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. And the 2 of these 2 monsters kept this 16-year-old girl as their sex slave and took her around the world with them for their the horrific abuses that took place. So these files need to be released, not only for those in the public who believe in transparency, but for the victims to finally get some type of closure, if they can ever get closure in their lives.
Barry Levine, the public can't look away from this story. And it's not that it's a sex scandal. It's deeper. I think they get it. They certainly have a long history of hearing about how terrible this is. And no matter what, it needs to be stopped. And then now it's sitting right in front of them at the highest levels. What do you think it is about this particular web, using your spider metaphor, this blend of power and privilege and predation, that keeps pulling us back in when the Kardashians are still having lunch here in LA?
Well, Cary, there are, as I said earlier in this conversation, there are guilty men out there, not only in America, but in other parts of the world, who took part in the sex trafficking. And these men need to be brought to justice. And why the DOJ won't go after these men boggles not only my mind, but so many others who have continued to look into this. Not only that, but of course the enablers, the other men who put these women on planes or helped arrange bringing them to Jeffrey Epstein's home. Jeffrey Epstein, his currency was, he had $600 million at the time of his death. I'm sorry, $600 million at the time of his death. You have to ask yourself, and he had been a billionaire. As I said, he had moved more than $1 billion through bank accounts. You have to ask yourself, where did all this money go? And why did the banks look the other way when these transactions were happening? Not only JP Morgan Chase, which has come clean and has given, as I said, more than $200 million to some of his victims, but other banks across the world that Jeffrey Epstein moved his money through. They were very, very smart individuals that took part in Jeffrey Epstein's web. Now, not all of these men took part in the wrongdoing, but Jeffrey Epstein was a collector of people. He would make associations, people like Bill Gates, people like the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the head of various universities, high-ranking individuals at Harvard University's top scientists, senators, congressmen, governors. He collected people, and he would try to put these people together in terms of doing businesses together. And so he would hold court with very famous individuals, and some of these men that he took millions and millions of dollars from, like the Leslie Wexner, who had been the head of the CEO of the Limited company, who was called the Merlin of the mall, from his stores of Victoria's Secret and others. Individuals like Leon Black, the financier here in New York. These men paid Jeffrey Epstein millions of dollars for his financial consulting. Jeffrey Epstein was a wizard in the sense he was extremely, extremely brilliant, but he was also an absolute brilliant criminal in the fact that he was able to juggle, meetings with these extremely intelligent and powerful individuals, and then in between he would be having, he would be sexually abusing these girls, these children. I'm horrified about what I uncovered for the book. There was even a girl who had been taken to his island, who was so abused there that she actually tried to swim off the island to get to the mainland. And Jeffrey Epstein sent his security people after her on boats, and they brought her back, and they chained her up in one of the bedrooms. This was a sick and twisted individual, but at the same time, a brilliant mathematician, an individual who felt comfortable talking politics and humanitarian causes with former President Clinton, and various, the smartest people in the world, powerful people like Bill Gates. Why these people couldn't see through who Jeffrey Epstein really was?
How would they see through it?
Horrible.
Just like any person who's very charismatic, very successful, you're attracted to their success and their power. You don't get to see behind the curtain unless you do. But, people are eccentric when they have a lot of money. They're not bad people. They're just eccentric. We're going to get into that and that nuance in just a second. This is the Cary Harrison Files. Don't forget, we are live streaming on YouTube. Simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube or Cary Harrison Substack. You can go to caryharrison.com. Cary spelled like the Cary Grant, Cary. And you can get our newsletter where we will include stuff you simply cannot get on FCC-regulated airwaves, whatever that means nowadays.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And we are giving some love to KPFK right now. This is your time to pick up the phone and call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, and make a $120 pledge. As you know, public media has been defunded. It's not a joke. It was talked about in, 8 minutes by the government, and they just swooped in and did it. All in Project 2025, which we've talked about ad nauseum. If you want to know the future, there's your crystal ball. It's all written down for you, piece by piece, clearly enumerated in 933 glorious pages. We happen to be listed in there by call letters and by name. So we are a victim of that too. Unlike before, these are special asks that we're giving right now because this is truly existential for us. That's why I'm asking you to pick up the phone, make a $120 pledge at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. And as our thank you gift to you, we're going to give you the book, The Spider, Inside the Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Written, of course, by our guest right now, Barry Levine. And it is a masterpiece of chronicling the history. He has done personal interviews with inmates in the very prison where Jeffrey Epstein was. He has done all of the background, all of the research. And if you want to know how a true Bond villain pulled off such a scheme, such a caper, made so much money, got away with it, as Barry just pointed out, seemingly invisibly, this is a must-read to understand the people now in power and how they seem somehow to be doing the same thing. Not to you. You're awake. You might even be woke and see what's going on around you. Not everyone else is. They're being snookered bigly. So you need to pick up the phone right now and call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Please make that make a $128 pledge. And we're going to give you that thank you book, The Spider Inside the Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It is an important read. You need to have it. You need the education. You need to support public radio while we still exist. Knowing that this show turns into a podcast, renders through Spotify, through Apple, through iTunes, through everything with a chip and a signal, it keeps multiplying on and on. It is university level information. The stuff that we talk about here will be distributed to young and old. Wonderfully so, because we're able to pay for it. If we can't pay for it, it goes away. This signal goes away, the podcasts go away, and all you've got left is Newsmax and Fox News. And it's not a joke. It's in Project 2025. That is the plan. The plan is being executed. Or like in scuba diving, you plan the dive and you dive the plan. And that's what you do. Nothing outside of that. So here we are today, defunded public radio, asking you to keep us on the air for real. Not, we've always been threadbare, but this is truly existential stuff. So please pick up the phone right now. Call 818-985-KPFK. Make that $120 pledge. 818-985-5735. 818-985-KPFK. And know that you are doing the right thing. In a time where the entire Department of Education been whacked, my ancestor, Abraham Lincoln, was the one who made it happen. The founding fathers had the idea. They didn't call it necessarily the Department of Education, but they felt everyone in America deserved an education. We know that's folly, that's felonious, but the spirit was there. It was Abe Lincoln who realized that African Americans had been physical property of white Southerners and that they had not been allowed to have educations because they were property. And even before the 1960s, when African Americans and Native Americans were allowed to be listed as live human beings. Before that, Abraham Lincoln, during Reconstruction, created the Department of Education so that everyone would have an education who, by the way, included Southerners who didn't have educations. He felt that if they knew what was going on, it would be really tough to shackle someone and not have to think about it, like a Quaker. That's why Quakers gave up their slaves in the 1700s, 100 years, 150 years before Abraham Lincoln officially got rid of it. This is what we're doing here. This is abolition of ignorance, abolition of bigotry, abolition of all the irritants that you have to deal with in your social life. So pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Please make a $120 pledge. Please do that. Save yourself, save people you've never even met, save your children, your grandchildren, your children's children, your cat, your dog, your chihuahua, your spaniel. Everyone will thank you for doing the right thing and supporting a better way of life, a smoother path for everyone to walk on, including the people that follow you. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, $120 pledge, and our thank you gift, the spider inside the web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And now back to our guest, Barry Levine.
Smells like fish.
Tastes like chocolate.
It's the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And Barry Levine, as we wrap this up, we just have a few minutes left. This book that you've written has got to have put you in the crosshairs of some very angry people in Washington. What is that like? Is it worth it?
Well, listen, Cary, before I wrote the Epstein book, I co-authored a book called All the President's Women, Donald Trump and the Making of a Predator with my co-author, Monique Alfazi. So, I'm not afraid of, I believe, and it may be a dying art here, I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in freedom of the press. And I believe that we need to keep on reporting and keep our government in the checks and balances that we need. As I wrote in the New York Times in my op-ed piece, open the files, not only for the transparency, but for, our American belief in government. Let's be transparent. Let's put politics aside and let's do this as a country together and dig through these files and determine if there are individuals that need to be investigated, if there's corroborating evidence, and if so, let's bring them to justice, for God's sakes. I mean, this is about sex trafficking. This is about the abuse of children. Why can't we come together on this? And what is in the files that the government is so afraid of releasing to the American public?
The American public is keen on this. I mean, whether you're MAGA, whether you're not MAGA, whether you're Mildred, whether you're Jason, Jeremy, Jennifer, or Jared, you would like this information brought out because it's reasonable to have access to something you were promised to receive. Yet there is pushback.
Yeah, I mean, there's pushback, and we need for the government to open these files, redact the names of the victims. That's most important. But we need to get, as Senator Ron Wyden has said, we need to follow the money. We need to go down the money trail and find out if there were financial crimes or other crimes committed by powerful individuals who may have taken part in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking. I was at the rally with the victims a few weeks back in Washington, D.C. And this was a moment when 100 of the Epstein victims came together. And they basically said at this rally, they said, if the government is not going to release the files, that we among ourselves will put together a list of men who took part in this, and we will turn that list over. And is that what this has come down to, that the victims themselves have to band together to get some type of justice here? Why won't the Department of Justice help them? That's the question that I have.
That is the question, and it's probably the same answer that you would have with your own self-advocacy for your medical care. It's the new system, so we have to do a major reboot, and maybe that will happen. Maybe you have planted the seed of a new tree that gets to grow. I want to thank you so much for having come on, Barry Levine. We've been talking about The Spider, Inside the Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, a book about the dark art of power, of privilege, and those who mistake immunity for innocence. Our guest, Barry Levine, has been digging through the cobwebbed corners of that world, tracing how a certain financier's charm turned into a global infection of complicity. Pick up the phone, call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, 818-985-5735. Make that $120 pledge. Keep us on the air and keep the truth out there. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.